9:49 a.m. Friday, November 21st, 2025. What is our highest vision? My highest vision is going to my city hall and sharing my presence. And there are certain perspectives and different ways it can go, and I can't name certain ways it can go until I demonstrate them. But this is non-violent. But those who work for the duality consciousness, who serve the us versus them, will see this as a threat. But the First Amendment in the United States of America allows us to share our voice, which can be done in a variety of ways. And you can blindfold yourself. You can be holding a document with a list of fundamental principles that need to be reconsidered in reflection to the state of our culture, our institutions, our society. And it can be like a scroll that has a variety, has a list. These are just metaphors for what is within us. And we can name each part of the aspect. Maybe it's sitting down on the sidewalk in front of City Hall because you're not allowed to sit on the steps. But City Hall is a metaphor for the governing body of our choices that we make as a soul being. A soul of what? Of the essence. That there is more that can be said, but ultimately there is nothing that can fully capture. It's infinite. It's infinity. So, when you look into the eyes of another, you can see a certain portion of their soul, and it can be hard to look directly into what might be, in my perspective, the camera lens, which isn't a human being right in front of me, that is not interpreting my consciousness in a neutral way. But we can project that through the lens, or through our ability to capture. We can refine and tune so that the frequency we can produce allows for the redistribution of material and immaterial principles, so that everyone really feels the history of humanity that is not as what we have been told the history of humanity has been from a religious or scientific perspective. Even from a certain esoteric perspective, there are limits to what words can really convey. But much has been said, if someone really looks. But of what has been said, there is the practical application of doing what cannot be spoken. It requires the action, and sometimes the action is speaking. We've been silent for so long that we feel it is time. And we might be incorrect about what we are talking about, which is why it's important to study to some regard in relation to our intuition, which doesn't always require us to study It's like a dance, a tango, from the beginning to the end. But anyways, City Hall. Can I apply the principles to someone sitting down, having a blindfold on, and sharing a document? Why does he have to be sitting down? Why can't he be standing up, or she, or they, or... In the silence, there is transcendence. And so, people might not want to be filmed. And it can be difficult to describe the process, but it's basically a certain reflection of accountability, even if the one filming does not have a full perspective of what they might claim to say, or what recording. We have a certain right if we are tuning into the frequencies of the Fibonacci, which may seem like a compromise at times, choosing choices that lead on the material spectrum, but there are cycles that we know if we don't choose life, if we don't choose non-duality, if we don't choose oneness with discernment to cast boundaries and frameworks to really cut the so-called evil, the so-called dominating force on Earth. And so with that being said, me doing the same thing I've been doing lately isn't an ultimate guarantee for my own development and the people and their development to see as I could see, as one united being. And so, is there something that I would like to say? It can seem very difficult to act upon what might be considered the next level. That might be a turning point, that might require some backlash from certain forces, even though there will always be backlash as we flow with the cycles. But we are all one. And yet, we are individualizations of one. And of that one, there may have been, and there may be, ones that have various connections to a universal I of another spectrum of intelligence on such levels that our modern instruments and perspectives often do not consider. But dealing with Earth, who needs to understand about the cosmology? And our secular society and our dogmatic, fanatical religious society. And then there's pacifists, and there's nihilists, positivists. It's such an interesting dance. Being able to record it is a symbol for what? To record. What are we recording? What could never be cut? Even though it can seem like if today is our last day in this body, the cord can surely be cut in so many ways that it is difficult to describe. And it can seem real, so very real, even if you have gone through the initiations, through the mystery schools in different cultures and societies, perhaps on different worlds, but on Earth as it is in heaven. And what is heaven but the will to surrender what happens to us today and others, knowing that as we flow with the discernment of the heart, we will have the ideas to express publicly what may not be so considered or chosen, that could shift the equation. And this time I've been kind of avoiding eye contact. You're like, well, it's not really eye contact. It's metallic parts. And you might say my eyes are biological parts. Simple biology. Our visual cortex that is connected with the pituitary and the pineal, the alpha and the omega, allows for the coiling of energy to consider what we can choose this day. This might sound dualistic, but there is a master of darkness and a master of light. And they are symbols, ultimately, for what is within us. How could we forget that? Or how did we not know that? I notice a very shift in vibration when I change the camera lens to the other side. But anyways, what matters? Does matter matter? Or does the source of matter matter more than matter? So much more that it doesn't see matter as matter or separate or categorical into something that can be defined through a language, through an image, but through the path, through civilizations, through the day-to-day, or this one, we can see the rebirth if we choose the surrender, which sometimes is sharing, but sometimes it is listening. Even if no one seems to be interested, there are higher ups. If you have higher ups, in the sense that those who can be considered more advanced in a way, and that's based on a competition. Who's having the more powerful and privileged, iconic life? Anyways, the patriarchy will fall and it won't turn into a feminarchy, even though there's no absolutes in free will. It's possible that it's been done, but not necessarily on this planet. But anyways, but it's, the material institutions, even religion, is the surface for something much bigger. And if the cells in these buildings around us, or the squares in the ground below us, if they can unite in harmonious resonance of beings expressing their consciousness in coordination with geometries that are in sync with laws and rhythms and symphonies that see the healing and the development of society so much by infusing different talents together. And there's lots of performances in the entertainment zones of people using technology with sound, and it's been perverted to a certain degree, but free will allows us to experience however much until we reach the end point where we do have to really face something else, even though we can still deny that something else even after we've had a very a 0 point initiation. But we can find that point in every situation if we let go of trying to see an ultimate system on Earth and just open ourselves to these next levels that shift the foundation but yet surrender the need to change anyone, to just present them in the way in which we feel is drawn to us, even though we still may need to explore and we don't necessarily know what field. Maybe we need to carve out more of our own field. Hoorah. So with this being said, record what is uncuttable. Even though the earth or humanity has chosen to believe that it's possible to a very large degree, it still is important to say that everything is being recorded, even if it seems to be cutting the chords of so many through the levels of the duality, self-centered pyramid of death. The cube of Saturn inverted. Some call it the black cube. Nothing related to skin color. There is some metaphors, but the yin is within the yang and the yang is within the yin. So, people who might consider themselves white, or this or that, are also united. They are two beings in one. From a certain, perhaps material perspective, but the psychological, spiritual perspective doesn't determine our appearance or exactly where our culture. There can be trends, but just know you can reincarnate into different cultures, different genders, even though ultimately what makes our choice of the day for the universal heart is holding the vision of not just the image, but the being that has no image, that you are one with all beings in that which has no name, no word, no form, but still there is an all-pervading being that may not necessarily know all and see all by a certain standard we have here on earth, but definitely is aware of many things that we can't even comprehend. What does an ideal society look like? Let's just say we agree, just for a moment. What next? What's the next level up? You know, world peace, let's say war and disease and environmental imbalances, hatred, judgment, torture, violence, stereotypes, discrimination, prejudice, elitism, extremism, terrorism, fanaticism, idolatry, attachment to a image that we might think is absolute or is superior or has no place in society and should be just transformed through meditation in a temple far away or in our own room for many hours. The figure 8. But holding an image of that next step might seem far, far away, but as we consider that image with an open heart, and an open mind, we might be able to feel. There are different ways it can go. You don't have to be in a specific outer place at a specific time. Whether it's the highest point or the lowest point in society, in a culture, in a city or town, village. But at the same time, there are benefits to both. Imagine this scenario in your mind. You and other beings with a higher level of consciousness are with you, even though they may not interact with the choices that have to be made. They are holding space for different ways it can go without attachment to one particular choice. And you're dealing with, perhaps in a city, the crime, the murder, the scandals of financial innuendo, financial mischief, corruption. But it's not just financial. There are many levels to how the ideological identity of humanity trickles down into the money, business, corporate, work-based, labor-based, survival-based, basic needs-based, as well as the luxurious, privileged initiatives where people can look at each other sitting down, going through a process. Some do it through dancing. I don't necessarily. You can do it by just looking, but it should be known that when a person looks into another person's eyes, you are also revealing your galaxy that you have within you, or your universe. But what do the planets and the asteroids and the stars and suns and all the constellations, what do they represent within you? And that is the grand journey of the universe, realizing it's the universe. But practically, materially, logically, there is something working itself out. Even if we are not aware of all the different ways, threads, cords that put this together. And I'm still filming on myself because there's like an energy dynamic between you here, even though there can still be one, even if the camera is flipped. It just depends on the vibration that I am speaking about. But for now, the choice. I was going to do a thought visualization, a thought experiment, where you and beings of a higher consciousness, however you imagine that, were with you, and perhaps let's see here. You had the opportunity to directly confront all members of your society as a sort of ambassador, representative of different programs and initiatives that can be created to help people in general and specifically transcend the what creates cancer, war, poverty, disease, separation, objectification, hatred and lust, violence, terror, torture, horror, tragedy, is the fear of looking into the mirror when we look at so-called others or other things. With this being said, these buildings are a magnificent transmitter of energy if there is geometrical synchronization for a human-centric, psycho-spiritual, multi-institutional international cause. There are certain limits to what I'm saying as well. I'm not saying there aren't good people and benefits, lessons that are being learned, but oftentimes free will chooses the long way on planets that are unnatural. But yet, can we say it is natural that in free will throughout the universe there are detours, there are slums, there are traps in a way, but ultimately it can take a long time for a soul being. Sometimes it doesn't work out for some as they return to the oversoul. If they, like certain beings who ran out of opportunities to choose life and kept choosing death or duality or separation or some form of polarizing judgment that has a very closed heart and then mind. So with that being said, we're going to leave it here and allow the seeds to blossom at their time unto eternity's end. Amen. Malaha larna makya ha 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 ha. Miarni mi salarni hi ha 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 ha. Mialarna di hi harna ahya. Orni salahatu Miarna laki sahani Elarni meki Arnadi sala Iyanami Arnadia Arnadu ahaha 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 Mialami namarnamiki salahi Ernimikalarnadihi, Ernamalani, Ernamakaya, ah, ha, 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 oh, 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 Lord namikana, Ernami hi 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 hi, Arnamalarnamaki hi 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 hi, Arnimiki. Narnimekia na ha 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 ha, Isala nama ha 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 ha. Miarnemekiar nemelohor nimekia, Arnimekia salamar nemekia sali, ihi ihi. Ornatia salami hi 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 hi. Olamar mekoyarni manadi, ornamalarni mekotyam, ornamikelarnami salam basyahatyarni me. Ornime salarnime di kayana, orna di yarna kuyana, olarnime kutyama arni sutia, arnime kiya dusa. Erneme yarnime kuyanime kayani yarna. Olamar neme kodia mataya salam bernadia. Erneme koya salamar namia kanama salama nania. Ernama kaya salama nahihaya. Erneme kia salama kataya saleme arneme kiyo. Orneme kia salamar namaki, erneme kuya salarna, eyamakia salama tahia sala, kuya salamar namiyo, ornami kiali, olamar nimeki, hayani, huyala, ha 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 ha, lime haya siya kaya huya haya liya, ornamaya kia, ha 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 ha. Ernamia kaya salamia kaya hayalaya huhalia siyo. Ornamia kaya salaharnamia kaya suya ha 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 hayali. Ernamia kaya salaharnamia kaya su arnamia harni. Alarnimeku, arnimaya, arniayo, arnemikai salarnimeki, arnemikaya salarnimi ha ha ha, arnemiakaya salahalihi. Arnemia kayasa, arnemia kayasa, arnemia koyasa, elamia harnimeku, arnemia ka ayamoyala, arnemia kayasa la halamala kula halamala siakania, ornemia kayasa, arnemia kayasa, elamarnimeku, arnemia stilamarnemia kayasulamarnai, arnemia kasi. Larnime ki ha hu 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 hu. Elamar namia ernamaya la ha 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 ha. Alama hayaka, Ernemiya kuyahi, Alama, Alama, Alama kuyahala, Malakiyasi, Ernemiyaka, Ernamayahiya, Ernamiyakusalam, Marnahiyahalaham, Ernamiyakaya salahula harami, Ernimiyakayasa, Urnamiyakiyasa, Ularniyakiyasa, ha 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 ha. The universal light breathes in the contraction, and then it releases the expansion of the eternal fire from which all enumerates and evolves through the interdependent originations, the interconnected, united being that sees no differentiation, and yet allows parts of itself to believe in experience, that for a certain amount of cycles. And so this day can mark the cycle that has always and forever will allow you to become what you have always saw before the beginning, in which there was no end.